My sister didn't just steal my money, she stole my life. After 10 years of double shifts and saving every penny for my dream home, a bank teller told me it was all gone. My credit was ruined by a $40,000 loan I never signed for. I found the forged signatures. I found the lies. I had the police on speed dial, ready to watch my own sister be led away in handcuffs. But then I found out why she did it. That money didn't go to cars or clothes. It paid for a secret heart surgery, the only reason our mother is still breathing today. Now I'm in an impossible trap. If I report her, I get my life back, but my sister goes to prison and the shock might kill our mother. If I stay silent, I lose my house and drown in a debt I didn't create. She saved Mom's life by destroying mine. I don't know who the villain is anymore. Am I a monster if I choose my future over her freedom? Before I reveal the evidence that changed everything, I need you to be my jury. If you believe family should be protected no matter the cost, hit that like button right now. I am making my final decision based on your votes. To see the verdict video, where I reveal my sister's fate, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Share this with one person and ask them, what would you do? The clock is ticking. Check the pinned comment to vote A or B and tell me why. I'm reading every word. Now let's look at the trail she left behind. The sun had a way of hitting the cracked linoleum of our childhood kitchen that made everything feel golden, even when the fridge was empty and the radiator was knocking like a restless ghost. Looking back, that kitchen was the crucible where our roles were forged, long before we knew what those roles would cost us. My sister, Maya, and I were never just siblings. We were a closed system, a two-person infantry unit standing against the chaos of a world that seemed determined to overlook us. To understand the gravity of what she did later, to understand why the discovery of her betrayal felt like a literal physical blow to my sternum, you have to understand the foundation we built. It wasn't built on sand. It was built on a decade of shared secrets, whispered promises in the dark, and a division of labor that we thought was our greatest strength. I was the architect. From the time I was 7, I carried the weight of the responsible one, like a badge of honor that grew heavier every year. I was the one who kept the calendar, the one who knew exactly how many days were left until the electric bill was due, and the one who made sure Maya's homework was tucked into her backpack before the bus arrived. Our mother worked 3 jobs, leaving behind a trail of exhaustion and half-eaten dinners, and in that vacuum, I stepped up. I didn't mind the burden because I had Maya. While I was the logic and the structure, Maya was the soul. She was the heart of the family, the one who could walk into a room of mourning and somehow find the right frequency of light to make everyone breathe again. She had a luminosity that I lacked. If I was the person who ensured we had a roof over our heads, she was the person who made it feel like a home. Our bond was cemented in the lean years. I remember one winter specifically, when the pipes froze and the house felt more like a walk-in freezer than a sanctuary. We spent 3 nights huddled under a mountain of wool blankets in the living room, sharing the heat of our bodies. I spent those hours calculating how many more hours I could work at the local grocery store without failing my algebra exam. My mind a constant hum of numbers and survival. But Maya spent those hours telling me stories. She painted word pictures of a future where we lived in a house with a fireplace that never went out, where our mother wore silk instead of polyester, and where I finally got to stop counting pennies. She made me believe in a world I couldn't yet see. That was her magic. She gave me the emotional fuel to keep grinding, and in return, I protected her from the cold, hard edges of our reality. There was a silent, sacred pact between us. I handled the world so she could remain whole. I remember when she wanted to go to her senior prom, but the budget was non-existent. I worked 6 straight weekends of overtime, my hands raw from hauling crates, just so she could have that shimmering blue dress she'd stared at in the shop window for months. When I handed it to her, the way she looked at me with a mix of reverence and absolute, unwavering trust was worth more than any bank account balance. She called me her anchor. She told me that as long as I was there, she knew nothing truly bad could ever happen to us. And I believed her. I believed that my vigilance was enough to shield us both. As we moved into adulthood, that dynamic didn't dissipate. it solidified. I went into accounting, a profession that suited my need for order and my obsession with the numbers never lying. I became the person who managed the family's modest affairs, the one everyone called when a form needed to be filled out or a dispute needed to be settled. Maya became a social worker, throwing herself into the lives of others with a ferocity that was both beautiful and terrifying to behold. She didn't care about balance sheets or credit scores. She cared about people. She was the one who remembered every birthday, the one who stayed up all night sitting by our mother's bed when she had a flu that lingered too long, and the one who kept the family's emotional history alive. We were two halves of a whole. When our mother started getting older and the first signs of her health declining began to flicker like a failing light bulb, we didn't even need to discuss the plan. I would handle the logistics, the insurance, the doctor schedules, the mounting costs, and Maya would handle the care, the comfort, and the heart. I trusted her with our mother's spirit, and she trusted me with our collective survival. There was never a moment where I looked at Maya and saw a threat. I saw my reflection in a softer mirror. I saw the person who knew my deepest fears and my highest hopes. We had a ritual every Sunday. We would sit on the porch of the small house I was renting, the one I hoped to replace with a real home of my own one day. We would drink coffee and go over the week. I'd show her my savings goals, the spreadsheets that tracked my progress toward a down payment. I was so proud of those numbers. They weren't just digits on a screen. They were my ticket out of the precariousness of our childhood. They were my proof that I had finally conquered the chaos. Maya would nod, her eyes full of that familiar warmth, and tell me how proud she was of me. "You're our rock," she'd say, squeezing my hand. "I don't know where we'd be without your head for business." In those moments, the foundation felt impenetrable. It was built on 25 years of shared meals, shared grief, and a loyalty that felt biological. There was no room in my mind for the idea of betrayal. To me, Maya and I were the same person split into two different functions. I was the shield. She was the life worth shielding. I never checked my credit report with a sense of suspicion because I didn't think there were any enemies inside the house. I thought the perimeter was secure because I was the one guarding it. That is why the eventual realization didn't just feel like a secret coming to light. It felt like the floor of the universe simply ceased to exist. When you spend your entire life being the responsible one, the one who catches everyone else, you never imagine that the person you're holding up is the one who will eventually cut the rope. Our trust wasn't a choice. It was our air. And when I finally walked into that bank, expecting to sign the papers for my future, I had no idea that the air had already been sucked out of the room. I was still operating on the logic of our childhood kitchen, the belief that as long as we had each other, we were safe. I didn't realize that the heart of the family had found a way to beat without a conscience, and that the foundation I had spent my life building was already hollowed out from the inside. Every memory of us laughing, every shared struggle, every time I worked myself to exhaustion to make her life easier, it all flashed before my eyes in the moments before the truth hit. I remembered the way she'd look at me when she was scared, the way she'd tuck her head onto my shoulder when the world got too loud. I felt the weight of her trust in me, never realizing that she had turned that trust into a weapon. We were sisters. We were a team. We were the only thing the other one truly had. Or so I thought, as I stood there in my best blazer, ready to claim a piece of the world, completely unaware that the person I loved most had already sold my name to pay for a secret I wasn't allowed to know. It wasn't just identity theft. It was the demolition of the only reality I had ever known. I'm going to tell you exactly how it fell apart, but you have to remember this. Before the lies, before the debt, and before the impossible choice I'm facing now, there was only us. And in my world, us was supposed to be the only thing that was forever. The morning of the appointment, the air felt different, charged with the kind of electricity that only comes when a decade of delayed gratification finally nears its end. I had dressed with a precision that bordered on ritualistic. A pressed blazer, the heels that made me feel tall and capable, and a leather folder containing every pay stub, tax return, and bank statement of my adult life. To anyone else, those papers were just bureaucracy, but to me, they were a manifesto. They were the physical proof that I had won. I had spent years living in cramped apartments with thin walls and leaking faucets, all for the sake of the numbers in my savings account. As I pulled into the parking lot of the bank, the sun reflecting off the glass facade felt like a spotlight. This was my day. I was 32 years old, and I was about to sign the papers that would anchor me to a piece of the earth that was mine and mine alone. The lobby of the bank was a cathedral of quiet commerce. Polished marble floors, the muffled chime of elevators, and the faint, sterile scent of high-end cleaning products. I sat in the waiting area, my heart doing a rhythmic dance against my ribs. I kept touching the folder in my lap, making sure it was still there, as if it might vanish if I looked away. I thought of Maya. I had almost called her that morning to ask her to come with me, but I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to drive her to the little 3-bedroom house with the wraparound porch and the overgrown garden I'd already mentally pruned, and hand her a key. I wanted to see that look of wonder on her face when she realized the anchor had finally found a harbor. I was so caught up in the fantasy of our shared future that I didn't notice the silence of the bank was beginning to feel heavy, like the pressure change before a storm. "Miss Vance? Mr. Henderson will see you now." The assistant's voice was polite, but as I followed her toward the back offices, I felt a strange flicker of unease. Usually, when you are a client with a pristine credit score and a 20% down payment, the atmosphere is celebratory. Banks love people like me. We are the safe bets, the reliable earners. But as we passed the open cubicles, I noticed the way Mr. Henderson was looking at his computer screen. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't holding a welcome home packet. He was staring at a line of data with a furrowed brow, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose like a falling leaf. I sat down, the leather of the guest chair creaking under my weight. I offered a smile, the kind of professional, confident smile I'd practiced, but it died on my lips when he didn't look up. He clicked his mouse, a sharp, mechanical sound that seemed to echo in the small office, and then finally he cleared his throat. The shift in the room was instantaneous. The cold awakening didn't start with a scream. It started with a quiet, clinical observation that made the blood in my veins turn to slush. "There seems to be a significant discrepancy in your application, Sarah," he said, his voice dropping into that low, practiced tone doctors use when they're about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. I felt a nervous laugh bubble up in my throat. "A discrepancy? That's impossible. I've checked my documents 3 times. Everything is there, the earnings, the assets." "It's not your assets I'm looking at," he interrupted, finally turning the monitor toward me. "It's your liabilities. According to the credit pull we ran this morning, you have an outstanding, defaulted personal loan from a private lender in the amount of $42,000. It's been in arrears for 6 months. There are also 3 credit cards, all maxed out, all opened within the last year, currently in collections." The words hit me like physical debris. I stared at the screen, but the numbers didn't make sense. They looked like a foreign language, a jumble of symbols that had no business being attached to my name. I felt a ringing in my ears, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the hum of the air conditioning. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and pointed at the screen. That isn't mine," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like it was coming from miles away. "I don't have a personal loan. I only have 1 credit card, and I pay the balance every month. Look at my history. Look at the last 10 years. I don't miss payments. I don't carry debt. This has to be a mistake. A system error. Someone else with my name." Mr. Henderson sighed, and for the first time, I saw pity in his eyes. Pity is a terrifying thing to receive from a banker. It meant the math was final. The social security number matches. The date of birth matches. And Sarah, the billing address for these accounts? "It's your mother's house." The room tilted. I felt the oxygen leave my lungs in a single, jagged heave. My mother's house. I hadn't lived there in years, but I still used it as a permanent mailing address for a few old subscriptions. It was the one place I trusted implicitly. The one place where my mail was safe. I felt a cold sweat break out across my hairline as the logic began to stitch itself together. A grotesque tapestry of betrayal. Someone who knew my history. Someone who had access to my mail. Someone who knew I never checked my credit because I was so certain of my own discipline. "I need to see the application," I said, my voice hardening. The shock was being overtaken by a cold, sharp-edged panic. "Show me the signatures. Show me the bank where the funds were deposited." As he pulled up the scanned documents, the office seemed to shrink. The walls felt like they were pressing in on me, the air growing thick and hot. He clicked open a PDF of the original loan application. There it was. My name, written in a cursive that looked almost exactly like mine, but with a slight, familiar loop on the S that I hadn't used since high school. And then, the smoking gun, the secondary contact phone number. It wasn't my cell. It was Maya's. I sat there, staring at those 10 digits, and the world I had built. The foundation of trust, the Sunday coffees, the shared sacrifices, shattered into a million jagged pieces. I could feel the ghost of Maya's hand in mine from just a few days ago, when she'd called me her anchor. I realized then that while I was building a house of brick and mortar, she had been using my name to build a house of cards, and she'd let the wind blow it down right as I was standing under it. "Sarah? Are you all right?" Mr. Henderson's voice broke through the fog. I didn't answer. Couldn't. How do you explain to a stranger that your soul has just been evicted? How do you tell him that the $40,000 hole in your life was dug by the person you'd have died to protect? I looked at the folder in my lap, the one full of my proof of worthiness. Felt like trash. It was useless. My credit score, the numerical representation of my character and my labor, had been set on fire. "Because of the default and the collections," he continued, "we cannot move forward with the mortgage. In fact, until this is resolved, either by paying the debt in full or by filing an official police report for identity theft, you are effectively barred from any major financing." "I'm sorry." I stood up, but my legs felt like water. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't take my folder. I walked out of that office, through the marble lobby, and into the blinding sunlight of the parking lot. The sun didn't feel like a spotlight anymore. It felt like a searchlight, exposing the ruin of my life. I got into my car and sat there, the engine silent, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't crying. I was vibrating with a rage so pure it felt like a fever. Everything I had worked for was gone. The house, the garden, the porch, they had vanished, replaced by a mountain of debt I didn't sign for. I looked at my phone. There was a text from Maya. "Hope the meeting goes well. You deserve the world, big sister. Love you." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. She loved me. She loved me so much she had erased me. She had taken my identity and used it as collateral for a life she couldn't afford. I started the car, my foot hitting the gas with a violence that made the tires screech. I wasn't going to my apartment. I wasn't going to the lawyer. I was going to find her. I was going to look into the heart of the family and see exactly what kind of rot was living there. The drive was a blur of red lights and near misses. The cold awakening was over. The fire had started. I was going to get the truth, even if I had to burn down everything we had ever built to find it. The transition from the blinding sunlight of the bank parking lot to the suffocating darkness of my apartment felt like a descent into a tomb. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The only glow in the room came from the dual monitors of my workstation, casting a cold, blue pallor over my hands as I sat down. My professional training as an accountant had always been my shield: logic, order, and the cold comfort of data, but tonight it was the weapon I would use to dissect my own life. I felt like a coroner performing an autopsy on a loved one. My stomach was a knot of acid, but my fingers were steady as I began to log into every portal, every credit bureau, and every hidden corner of my financial existence. The first few hours were a blur of password resets and security questions. I realized with a jolt of nausea how easy I had made it for her. My security questions were based on the very history we shared. What was the name of your first pet? Barnaby, the golden retriever we found in the rain when I was 12. What street did you grow up on? Elmhurst, the place where we'd promised to never leave each other behind. Every lock I had placed on my life was a lock Maya held the key to. As I bypassed the gates of my own privacy, I felt a sense of violation that no stranger could ever inflict. This wasn't a hack. It was an invitation. I started with the personal loan Mr. Henderson had flagged. I pulled the digital application, my eyes scanning the metadata. It wasn't just about the signature anymore. I needed to know the when and the where. I navigated deep into the document's history until I found the IP logs from the electronic signing service. My breath hitched. The string of numbers stared back at me, mocking my ignorance. I didn't need a tracker to know that address. I had logged onto that same Wi-Fi network 100 times to show Maya my spreadsheets or to watch movies on her couch. It was her apartment. It was the place where she'd made me tea and told me she didn't know how I stayed so organized. All the while, the router sitting on her bookshelf was transmitting the data that would ruin me. I moved to the credit card statements. These were even more devastating. I expected to see a spree of luxury, designer bags, expensive dinners, the kind of things Maya always sighed over but could never afford. But the paper trail was stranger and more calculated. There were payments to a private clinic I'd never heard of. There were recurring charges to a pharmacy in a town 2 hours away. And then I found the PayPal transfers. Round numbers, $2,000, $5,000, $3,000. They were transferred to an account with a handle I recognized from Maya's old college days. The deeper I went, the more the forgery became apparent. On one of the scanned loan documents, there was a handwritten Sarah Vance that almost fooled me. But as I zoomed in, I saw the tells. Maya always had a tendency to double-dot her eyes when she was nervous. A tiny, idiosyncratic habit we'd laughed about as kids. There it was, clear as day on the signature line of a document that had stripped me of my future. She had sat there, perhaps with a cup of the tea I'd bought her, and practiced my name until she could mimic it well enough to satisfy a distant algorithm. She had studied me. She had used her intimacy with my handwriting as a blueprint for my destruction. I felt a sudden, violent urge to vomit. I pushed back from the desk, the wheels of my chair screeching against the floor. The silence of the apartment felt predatory. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory of Maya. Her sitting in that very chair, her borrowing my laptop, her asking for my social security number, just in case of an emergency with Mom. I had given her everything, thinking I was building a safety net. I didn't realize I was handing her the rope. I went back to the screens, driven by a masochistic need to see the full extent of the rot. I opened the most recent maxed-out credit card statement. The statement address had been changed 4 months ago. It wasn't my apartment, and it wasn't our mother's house. It was a P.O. box in a neighboring zip code. She had intercepted the physical mail. She had stood in the rain, or the heat, and pulled those envelopes out of the box, so I would never see the overdue stamps or the final notice warnings. The level of premeditation was staggering. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate mistake made in a panic. This was a long-term, high-maintenance lie. I found a series of emails archived in a subfolder of my own account that I hadn't checked in months. An old address I rarely used. She had rerouted the bank alerts there. I opened one from 3 months ago. The subject line read, "Your loan application has been approved." I clicked it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Attached was a photo of a government ID. I leaned in, my face inches from the blue light of the monitor. It was my driver's license, but the photo wasn't mine. It was a grainy, filtered picture of Maya, wearing a wig that matched my hair color and the glasses I'd lost a year ago. She had stared into a camera, pretending to be me, and she had smiled. That was the moment the responsible sister in me died. The girl who kept the spreadsheets, the girl who saved every penny, the girl who believed that if you did everything right, the world would treat you fairly. She was gone. In her place was someone cold and sharp. I looked at the digital evidence, the IP addresses, the double-dotted I's, and the forged ID. I had enough to put her away for years. I had enough to wipe the debt from my record by handing her to the state. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the contact for the local precinct. I could end this tonight. I could reclaim my credit score, my mortgage, and my house. But as I looked at the final PayPal transfer, I saw a memo line that stopped the blood in my tracks. It was a series of medical codes and a name. Dr. Aristone, oncology/cardiology specialist. The digital trail didn't end in a closet full of shoes. It ended in a hospital wing. I felt the rage falter, just for a second, replaced by a terrifying, hollow premonition. I realized I hadn't just been investigating a crime. I had been investigating a secret that Maya was willing to destroy me to keep. I closed my eyes. The blue light of the monitors still burned into my retinas. The paper trail was complete. The evidence was undeniable. But as I sat there in the dark, I realized that the truth was far more complicated than a forged signature. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a witness to a tragedy I didn't yet understand. But one thing was certain. By tomorrow morning, the foundation of trust wouldn't just be cracked. It would be gone. The drive to Maya's apartment felt like a descent into a fever dream. The streetlights blurred into long, jagged lines of neon, and the city around me seemed to have lost its substance, as if the betrayal had rendered the physical world as flimsy as the forged documents sitting in my passenger seat. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't want to give her a single second to craft another narrative or to pull on that heart-of-the-family mask she wore so well. I wanted her raw. I wanted to see the exact moment the light of her deception hit the cold air of reality. When I reached her building, I didn't take the elevator. I climbed the stairs, my heels clicking against the concrete with a rhythmic, military precision. Each step was a beat of my heart, and each beat was a reminder of what I had lost. The house, the security, the pride. By the time I reached the 4th floor, I wasn't just Sarah, the responsible accountant. I was a debt collector coming for a pound of flesh. I didn't knock softly. I hammered on the wood of her door, the sound echoing through the quiet hallway like a gavel. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the sound of a chain sliding, the click of a deadbolt, and the door swung open. Maya stood there in an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, looking exactly like the sister I had loved my entire life. She looked tired, deeply, bone-wearily tired, but when she saw me, a flash of genuine joy crossed her face before the realization of my expression set in. "Sarah? What are you doing here so late? I thought you'd be out celebrating the new." "Stop," I said. My voice was a whip, thin and sharp. I pushed past her into the living room, the space I had once considered my second home. It smelled of lavender and old books, a scent that now made my stomach turn. I turned to face her, dropping my leather folder onto her coffee table. The sound it made was heavy, final. "Celebrate what, Maya? The $40,000 default? The 3 maxed-out credit cards? Or maybe the fact that you used my social security number to burn my life to the ground?" The color didn't just drain from her face. It vanished, leaving her skin a sickly, translucent gray. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stood by the door, her hand still resting on the knob as if she were tempted to run. The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of 25 years of shared history now rotting in real time. Sarah, I can explain," she whispered. Her voice lacked its usual melodic warmth. It sounded hollow, like wind through a cave. "Explain the IP address?" I stepped toward her, the anger I'd been suppressed for hours finally boiling over. "Explain the forged signature? I saw the ID, Maya. I saw you wearing my glasses and a wig, smiling for the camera while you signed away my future. You didn't just steal money. You stole my name. You stole the house I worked a decade for. You sat across from me at Sunday brunch and watched me talk about my savings goals while you intercepted my mail." Maya's knees seemed to give out. She sank onto the edge of the sofa, her head dropping into her hands. "I didn't have a choice," she sobbed, the sound muffled by her palms. "I was going to pay it back. I had a plan, Sarah. I just needed more time." "Time?" I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You've had a year. You let the loans default. You let the collectors come for me. I was at the bank today, Maya. I stood there like a fool while a stranger showed me how my own sister had ruined me. Why? Was it the apartment? The clothes? What was worth this?" I grabbed a handful of the papers from the folder, the PayPal transfers, the medical codes, and threw them onto the table in front of her. I saw the clinic names. I saw the specialty doctors. "If you're going to lie to me one more time, make it a good one." "Who is sick, Maya?" Who is so important that I had to lose everything? Maya looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and streaming with tears, but for the first time that night, there was a different look in them. It wasn't just guilt. It was a desperate, terrifying sort of courage. She reached into the side pocket of her bag and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it toward me. "It wasn't for me, Sarah," she choked out. "And it wasn't for a house or a car. It was for Mom." I froze. "Mom? Mom has insurance. She has her pension. I handle her finances." "No, you handle what she tells you about," Maya interrupted, her voice gaining a sudden, frantic strength. "She didn't want to tell you. She didn't want to be a burden to the daughter who finally had her life together. 6 months ago, the doctors found a blockage, a rare condition that her basic plan wouldn't cover. The surgery was experimental. The cost was $50,000 upfront, or they wouldn't even put her on the list." Maya stood up, her small frame shaking. "She told me she was just going to let it happen. She was going to go quietly because she didn't want to take your house money. But I couldn't do it, Sarah. I couldn't watch her die because of a balance sheet. I asked for loans in my name, but my credit is nothing. I'm a social worker. I have no collateral. You were the only one with the perfect record. You were the only one who could get the money fast enough." I looked down at the papers in the envelope. Medical charts, authorization forms, a receipt for a surgery dated 3 months ago. The same week Mom had told me she was feeling so much better after a long bout with the flu. "I saved her life?" Maya whispered, moving closer to me, her hands reaching out as if to touch my arm, though she pulled back at the last second. "She's alive because I took that money. She's sleeping in her own bed right now because I lied to you. I took the hit so you wouldn't have to choose between your dream and your mother. I thought I could handle the debt myself. I thought I could work enough side jobs to keep it quiet until I could figure out a way to tell you." The rage in my chest didn't disappear, but it shifted. It became something heavier, more complex. I looked at the sister I had called the heart of the family, and for the first time, I saw the darkness that comes with that role. She had played God with my life to save another. "You didn't take the hit, Maya," I said, my voice trembling. "I did. You didn't give me the choice. You decided that my life was worth less than her survival, and you didn't even have the respect to ask me if I agreed." "Would you have?" Maya asked, her eyes searching mine with a terrifying intensity. "If I had told you the truth, that Mom was dying and the only way to save her was to take your house fund and ruin your credit for 7 years, would you have said yes? Or would you have looked at your spreadsheets and told me it wasn't logical?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. I didn't have an answer. I looked at the evidence of her crime and the evidence of her love, and I realized the foundation of trust wasn't just broken. It had been replaced by an impossible, agonizing choice. "I'm calling the police," I said, though my voice lacked the conviction I'd had an hour ago. "Then call them," Maya said, her face hardening as she wiped her tears. "If putting me in prison is the only way you can get your house back, then do it. But Mom will find out. She'll know that the only reason she's alive is because I'm a criminal, and she'll know that you were the one who sent me away. Is that the responsible choice, Sarah?" I looked at the phone in my hand, then at the sister who had betrayed me, then at the medical records of the woman who gave us life. The confrontation was over, but the nightmare was only just beginning. The drive from Maya's apartment to our mother's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The city was asleep, but my mind was a riot of conflicting images. The cold, clinical lines of the bank's rejection letter and the warm, vibrant smile on my mother's face during our last dinner. I kept looking at the passenger seat where the manila envelope lay, the physical evidence that my sister was both a predator and a savior. I wanted Maya to be a monster. It would have been easier if she were a monster. If she had gambled the money away or spent it on a life of luxury, I could have made the call to the police without a second thought. But she had gambled on something much more dangerous, the value of a life I wasn't ready to lose. When I pulled into the driveway of the small, shingled house where we grew up, the porch light was on. It was a beacon of the safe world I thought I lived in. I let myself in with my spare key, the familiar scent of cinnamon and old wood hitting me like a physical weight. The house was quiet, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I walked toward my mother's bedroom, my heart hammering. I found her sitting up in bed, propped against a mountain of pillows, reading a book under the soft glow of a bedside lamp. When she looked up and saw me, her face lit up with that pure, uncomplicated love that had always been my North Star. "Sarah? Goodness, what are you doing here at this hour? Is everything okay?" I stood in the doorway, my eyes scanning her. I looked for the signs I had missed. I saw the slight paleness of her skin that I'd attributed to age, and the way she moved a bit more slowly. But I also saw the steady rise and fall of her chest, a breath that was being funded by my stolen future. I was nearby and wanted to check in. I lied, the words tasting like ash. I walked over and sat on the edge of her bed, taking her hand. Felt fragile, like a bird's wing. "Mom, tell me the truth. How have you really been feeling?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the vanity across the room where a photo of Maya and me stood. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine. It's a miracle, really. A few months ago, I thought, well, it doesn't matter now. The doctors found a way. I'm a new woman. The doctors found a way? Or Maya found a way?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's grip on my hand tightened, and the light in her eyes shifted from joy to a profound, aching guilt. She looked away, her bottom lip trembling. "She told you," my mother whispered. "I told her not to. I told her I'd rather go and meet your father than have you girls worry about the cost. I told her I wouldn't take a penny from your house fund, Sarah. I know how hard you worked for that. I know that house was your dream." "She didn't take it from the fund, Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "She took it from me. She took out loans in my name. She ruined my credit. She lied to the banks, and she lied to me for a year." My mother let out a jagged, broken sob and covered her face with her hands. "Oh no. No, she told me she'd found a grant. She told me there was a special program for seniors. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. I wanted to stay here for you both. I didn't know, Sarah, I didn't know she'd hurt you like this." I sat there, watching the woman who raised me crumble under the weight of a gift she never asked for. This was the reveal. This was the moment I realized that the secret Maya had kept wasn't just a medical one. It was a burden of debt that was now distributed across all three of us. My mother was alive, but the cost of her life was the destruction of the trust that held our family together. "She did it because she loves you," my mother choked out, reaching for me. She was desperate. She saw me failing and she couldn't handle it. "Please, Sarah, please don't hate her. Hate me. I'm the one who should have been stronger." I looked at my mother, her eyes bright with tears, her heart beating steadily behind her ribs, and I felt a wave of nausea. I had come here looking for clarity, but all I found was a more agonizing shade of gray. If I reported the crime, I would be sending my sister to prison for saving this woman's life. If I stayed silent, I was agreeing to be a victim, to lose my home, and to carry a $40,000 lie for the rest of my life. I pulled away gently and stood up. I couldn't be the responsible one in this room anymore. There was no spreadsheet for this. There was no logical way to balance a mother's life against a credit score. "Get some sleep, Mom," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing quietly into her pillows. As I stood in the dark hallway, looking at the photos of our perfect family on the walls, I realized that the miracle Maya had performed was actually a curse. She had saved our mother, but she had turned our home into a crime scene. I walked out to my car, the manila envelope heavy in my hand. The reveal was complete. Now the clock was ticking. The bank was waiting. The police were a phone call away, and the heart of my family was beating with stolen time. If you find this story interesting, kindly subscribe, like, comment, and share. The days that followed were a blur of cruel irony. I spent my mornings on the phone with debt collectors and my afternoons sitting by my mother's side, watching her color return. This was the cost of life. a ledger where the numbers simply refused to balance. Every time I saw my mother take a deep, effortless breath, I was reminded of the $40,000 weight pressing down on my own chest. The more she recovered, the more my own life seemed to decay. The physical reality of the debt began to manifest in small, humiliating ways. I received a letter in the mail, not to the P.O. box Maya had used, but to my actual apartment, notifying me that my own credit card, the one I had used faithfully and paid off for years, had been canceled. The bank cited adverse information on my credit report. I stood in the grocery store line that evening, a basket of healthy food for my mother's new diet in my hand, and felt the hot sting of shame as the cashier told me my card was declined. I had to put back the fresh produce and the vitamins, walking out with only the bare essentials I could cover with the crumpled 20s in my purse. At work, the pressure was worse. As an accountant, my reputation was built on being the person who never missed a detail. But now, I was distracted, my mind constantly calculating the interest on loans I hadn't even authorized. I found myself staring at spreadsheets until the cells blurred into Maya's forged signature. My boss, Mr. Eris, called me into his office to ask why my last 3 reports were late. I sat there, looking at a man who valued fiscal integrity above all else, and realized I couldn't tell him the truth. If the firm found out I was linked to a massive identity theft and defaulted loan, even as the victim, my professional standing would be scorched. The most agonizing part was the silence between Maya and me. She would call, and I would watch the phone vibrate on the table until it went dark. She would send texts, "Mom's physical therapy went well today," or, "I'm picking up her prescriptions, don't worry." Every message was a reminder that she was still playing the hero, still maintaining the heart of the family, while I was the one drowning in the wake of her noble crime. She was the one holding Mom's hand, receiving the gratitude, while I was the one receiving the legal threats. I went to visit Mom on Thursday, carrying a small bag of groceries I'd managed to pay for in cash. She looked radiant. She was sitting in the sun on the back porch, a far cry from the frail woman I'd seen in the hospital bed. "Sarah, look," she said, standing up without help. "I walked all the way to the mailbox and back today. The doctors are so impressed." I forced a smile, but my heart felt like a lead weight. Every step she took was a step I couldn't take toward my own home. I looked at the house, the peeling paint, the sagging gutters, and realized that even this place wasn't safe. If I didn't find a way to clear the debt, the collectors could eventually come for my mother's assets, too. Maya's solution had only delayed the disaster. It hadn't prevented it. "That's great, Mom," I whispered. "Maya says we should have a big dinner on Sunday," Mom continued, her eyes bright, "to celebrate. She's going to cook your favorite." The thought of sitting across a table from Maya, eating a celebratory meal while my life was in ruins, made the bile rise in my throat. Maya wanted us to pretend. She wanted the betrayal to be folded into the family history as a necessary sacrifice. She wanted me to absorb the cost so she could keep the halo. That night, I sat in my darkened apartment and did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was exhausted. I was tired of being the anchor. I was tired of being the responsible one who had to keep everyone else afloat while I was being dragged to the bottom. I looked at the police report I had started to draft on my laptop. All I had to do was hit send. I would get my credit back. I would get my house back. And I would lose my sister and likely my mother's health in the process. The cost of a life isn't just a number on a screen. It's the peace of mind you lose when you realize the people you love are capable of anything. As the moon rose over the city, I realized that I was no longer fighting for a house. I was fighting for my soul, and I didn't know which side was winning. The Sunday dinner was meant to be a celebration of our mother's recovery, but the air inside the house felt thick, like the moments before a massive tectonic shift. Maya had gone all out, roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, the crystal glasses we only used for holidays. She moved around the kitchen with a frantic, artificial cheer, her eyes darting toward me every time I entered the room. She was waiting for a sign, a look, a nod of forgiveness that I was physically unable to give. My mother sat at the head of the table, looking healthier than she had in years. She was oblivious to the jagged edges of the silence between her daughters, or perhaps she was simply choosing to ignore them, desperate to preserve the illusion that her life had been saved without cost. "Isn't this wonderful?" Mom said, reaching out to pat my hand. "The three of us together again. I feel like I've been given a second chance at everything." I looked down at my plate. The food looked like plastic. "It's a miracle, Mom," I said, the irony tasting like copper in my mouth. "A $40,000 miracle." The clinking of silverware stopped. Maya froze, a serving spoon halfway to her plate. The mask of the heart of the family slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the raw, terrified girl underneath. "Sarah," Maya whispered, a warning and a plea wrapped into one word. "What? We're celebrating, aren't we?" I looked up, my eyes locking onto Maya's. "We should talk about the cost. We should talk about how the responsible one doesn't have a credit card anymore. How the responsible one had to walk out of a grocery store because her name is now synonymous with fraud. Don't you think that's part of the celebration, Maya?" "Sarah, please not now," Maya said, her voice trembling. "Not in front of Mom." "Why not?" I stood up, the chair screeching against the hardwood floor like a scream. "Mom is the one living in the house built on my ruin. She should know that every pill she takes and every breath she draws is a withdrawal from my life. You didn't just save her, Maya. You drafted me into a war I never signed up for." My mother looked between us, her face paling. The family divide wasn't a crack anymore. It was a canyon. "Girls, please," she begged, her voice small. "I didn't know. If I had known, I would have stayed sick. I would have." "But you didn't know," I shouted, the years of being the anchor finally snapping. "Because Maya decided she was the only one who got to be the hero. She decided that I didn't need a house, or a career, or a future. She decided for me. And now, I'm the one who has to decide if I'm going to be a victim or a whistleblower." Maya stood up then, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "I did it for her. You would have let her die, Sarah. You would have looked at your bank account and said, 'Sorry, Mom. The math doesn't work out.' You're so obsessed with your perfect life that you forgot we're people, not line items on a spreadsheet." "I am the reason you have a roof," I screamed back. "I am the reason there was even a name worth stealing. You didn't save her because you're good, Maya. You did it because you're a coward who couldn't handle the truth. So you made me pay for the lie." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother began to cry. Not the soft, relieved tears of a survivor, but the ragged, gut-wrenching sobs of a woman who realized she had become the wedge driving her children apart. Maya stared at me, the heart of the family finally showing its scars. I realized then that we could never go back. The trust was gone, replaced by a debt that could never be repaid with money. We were no longer a team. We were three people tied together by a crime, waiting to see who would pull the trigger first. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the night, leaving the celebratory dinner cold on the table. The divide was complete. I was alone, standing on the edge of a choice that would either save my sister or save myself. The silence of the house after the dinner was replaced by the mechanical, heartless ticking of the legal clock. The bank was no longer sending polite inquiries or discrepancy flags. They were sending certified mail that required a signature I was now terrified to provide. I sat in my apartment, the blue light of the laptop illuminating the final notice from the primary lender. The headline was bold and uncompromising: "Demand for immediate payment or notice of legal action." I had exactly 72 hours before this moved from a private matter to a public record. Once the bank filed a lawsuit for the defaulted $40,000, the fraud would be out in the open. My name would be dragged through a court system that didn't care about a mother's heart surgery or a sister's noble intentions. To the law, this was a binary equation. Someone had stolen money using my identity, and if I didn't identify the thief, I was the one who owed the debt. The pressure began to manifest as a physical weight on my chest. I spent that night in a feverish loop, calculating my own liquidation. I looked at my 401k, my meager savings that had survived the initial shock, and even the value of my car. I could Theoretically, pay off a third of the debt if I emptied every single cent I owned. But that wouldn't stop the damage. The default was already on my record. The mortgage was already dead. Paying it now was like pouring water on a house that had already burned to the ground. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from Maya. I found a lawyer who specializes in mitigating circumstances. He says if you sign an affidavit saying you authorized the loan after the fact, we can convert it to a joint debt and the fraud charges will vanish. We can pay it back together over 20 years. Please, Sarah. This is the only way to save me. I stared at the screen until the words felt like they were vibrating. She was asking me to lie to the federal government. She was asking me to take legal responsibility for a crime I didn't commit, to tether myself to her for the next 2 decades. If I signed that paper, I was no longer a victim. I was an accomplice after the fact. I would be legally admitting that I was okay with her destroying my credit as long as we handled it as a family. The legal clock wasn't just about the bank anymore. It was about my own integrity. If I didn't report her within the next 3 days, the window to claim identity theft would effectively close. The bank would argue that my silence was a form of consent. Every hour I spent not calling the police was an hour I spent becoming a criminal alongside her. I walked to my window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, the house I wanted, the one with the wraparound porch, was being sold to someone else. Someone whose sister didn't have their social security number. Someone whose life wasn't a series of impossible trade-offs. I looked at the affidavit Maya had sent to my email. It was sitting there, waiting for my digital signature. Then, I looked at the police report I had drafted, the one that listed every IP address, every forged dot on every I, and every PayPal transfer to the oncology clinic. The clock was at 68 hours. If I chose the affidavit, I saved Maya but became a liar. If I chose the police report, I saved my future but destroyed my family. I felt like a prisoner in a cell where the walls were slowly moving inward. I realized then that being the responsible one didn't mean making the right choice. It meant being the one who had to live with the consequences of the wrong one. The dashboard clock in my car pulsed with a steady, rhythmic glow. 3:14 a.m. I was parked across the street from the local precinct, a squat, brick building that looked more like a fortress than a place of justice in the pre-dawn gloom. The engine was off and the cold was beginning to seep through the glass, biting at my fingers, but I didn't turn the heater back on. I wanted the cold. I needed the sharpness of it to cut through the fog of exhaustion and grief that had settled over me. In my left hand, I held my phone, the screen open to the digital affidavit Maya had sent. My thumb hovered over the signature box. In my right hand, I held a physical photograph I'd taken from my mother's hallway. A picture of the 3 of us from 5 years ago, standing at the beach, our hair windswept and our smiles genuine. Back then, we were just 3 women who thought the world was ours for the taking. We didn't know that the heart would eventually eat the anchor. This was the moral fork. If I walked into that building and handed over my folder, the gears of the state would grind Maya into dust. She would lose her social work license. She would likely face felony charges for identity theft and wire fraud. Our family name would be etched into a public record of shame, and the stress would almost certainly send our mother back into a cardiac spiral. I would get my credit back, yes. I would be able to buy that house. But I would be sitting in that house alone, knowing that the walls were built on the ruins of my sister's life. But if I signed that affidavit, if I lied and said I had known about the loan all along, I was signing away my freedom. I would be tied to Maya's financial chaos for 20 years. I would be paying for a surgery I never authorized, trapped in a cycle of debt that would keep me from ever truly owning anything of my own. I would be validating the idea that Maya's love was more important than my truth. I would be telling her that it was okay to erase me, as long as she had a good enough reason. I looked at the precinct doors. A patrol car pulled into the lot, its blue and red lights flashing briefly, painting the interior of my car in the colors of a crisis. I felt a sudden, violent surge of resentment. Why was it always me? Why was I the one who had to be the moral arbiter of this family? Maya got to be the hero who saved Mom. Mom got to be the survivor who was cherished. And I was the one sitting in a dark car at 3 in the morning, deciding which version of my own destruction I preferred. I thought of the unsolvable dilemma. There was no clean exit. There was no secret third option where everyone walked away happy. If I chose justice, I was a monster who put her sister in jail over money. If I chose mercy, I was a fool who let herself be a doormat for a criminal. I looked at the photo again. My mother's eyes were so full of life in that picture. That life was real. It was tangible. I could go to her house right now and hear her breathing. But my life, my dreams of the porch, the garden, the independence, that was real too, wasn't it? Or was my life just a series of payments I made to keep everyone else comfortable? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my wrists ached. The responsible one was tired. I was so tired of carrying everyone's secrets. I was tired of being the only one who cared about the rules in a family that thrived on breaking them. I turned on the car. The engine roared to life, a sudden, aggressive sound in the stillness of the street. I put the car in gear, my eyes fixed on the entrance of the police station. I had to decide, right now, before the sun came up and the legal clock struck 0. I looked at the phone. I looked at the station. I looked at the photo. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I didn't even know which of them I was apologizing to yet. The sun finally began to bleed over the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the pavement of the precinct parking lot. The light didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like an interrogation. I sat there, the engine idling, watching the officers switch shifts. Men and women in blue uniforms carrying coffee. Their lives simple, their rules clear. For them, there is a right and a wrong. For me, there is only a choice between two different types of a broken heart. I looked at the folder on my passenger seat one last time. It contained the evidence of a crime, but it also contained the receipt for my mother's heartbeat. If I walk through those doors, I am choosing my future over my blood. I am saying that my right to own a home and have a clean name is more important than my sister's freedom. I am saying that love is not a valid excuse for theft. But if I put this car in reverse and drive away, if I sign that affidavit, I am choosing to live a lie. I am accepting a life of debt and a ruined reputation to keep a family together that is already shattered. I am telling Maya that she can take whatever she wants from me, as long as she does it with a tear in her eye and a noble reason in her heart. I reached for the door handle. My hand was shaking so violently that the metal rattled against my ring. I thought of the house with the wraparound porch. I thought of my mother laughing in the sun. I thought of the cell door closing on the girl who used to tell me stories in the dark to keep me warm. I can't do this alone. I've been the responsible one for 32 years, and for the first time in my life, I don't know what the responsible choice is. I'm standing at the edge of the rest of my life, and I'm asking you to push me one way or the other. I am going to check the comments in exactly 24 hours. I will do whatever the majority tells me to do. My life, my sister's freedom, and my mother's peace are in your hands now. Now I need your verdict. Vote if I should walk into that station and file the report. My sister is a criminal who stole my identity, and I shouldn't have to lose my future because she couldn't handle the truth. Justice is justice. Vote B if I should sign the affidavit and take the debt. Family is the only thing that's real, and you can't put a price on a mother's life. Mercy is more important than a credit score. Tell me why in the comments. I am reading every word. I am waiting for your judgment. What would you do if it was your life on the line?